Hello, welcome to the spotlight video for this week, Ecological Systems Theory, which is based on Yuri Bronfenbrenner's work in the 1970s. He placed a heavy emphasis on a child's context and their environment, while still appreciating some of their individual characteristics that they bring. So the model that was created from his theory is based on the idea that a person's environment is made up of many interconnected systems that interact with each other and the individual. So the child is nested within all of these spheres, but then within each sphere, we see lots of multi-directional connections. And those intersecting forces shape their development. So kind of the running joke with this model is if someone's like, hey, is this impacting a student? The answer would be like, yes. Basically everything impacts a student and their success and development. So let's look at all of these different systems. So first of all, the child is in the center, nested in the middle. And then we have the microsystem. So that's the immediate environment where a child has direct interaction with. So for example, the family setting. Next, we have the mesosystem that acknowledges within the microsystem. So where a child has direct contact, there's also relationships between those different factors in those different spaces. So for instance, they intersect with a doctor, teachers in the school setting, the community, okay, and those people in those spaces have interactions as well. And so, for instance, at the mesosystem level, you can look at parent-teacher relationships, right? Because both parents and teachers are in their immediate environment, and their relationship is also going to impact the child and their success in school and their development. The exosystem level is where things get a little bit complicated. This is a child's indirect environment. So they might not have direct contact with those spaces or those individuals, but it does impact their life. So for instance, a parent and the medical care they receive or do not receive, could be part of the exosystem. So if a parent has a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue and is able to receive ongoing care and treatment, that will impact the child. Also, if the parent does not have access to medical care and treatment and services, that will impact the child. And so that's the exosystem. The macrosystem is the social, cultural, political values of wherever that child is growing up. So, for instance, I would say currently communities tend to, and societal systems tend to value structured time for kids, being able to be involved, registered for different programs, participating in different activities. That's heavily valued. Also, culturally responsive education. Depending on the state that you are living in, the values are going to look different, which then will trickle down to impact a child's learning and development. The chronosystem is all about time and how things can change over time. And so one thing that I was thinking about was technology. If you think back to classrooms in the 1980s, even in the 90s, how we use technology to gain information as well as produce information and show knowledge, that has really transformed over time. And so therefore that trickles down and impacts the child's even daily activities. Let's look at one specific phenomenon and see how this model would explain it. So I will say Yuri Bronfenbrenner's work is most, widely applied to family stuff. So anything looking at family engagement, relationships with homes, kind of early intervention services, even if you think about, I'm trying to think about just those early childhood, like Head Start, actually came out of Yuri Bronfenbrenner's work. So a lot of it has a heavy emphasis on family. So research shows that a strong relationship between a family and the teacher is related to student success. Research continues to highlight this. So you could apply the model to ask the question, okay, if that's true, why don't we have a strong relationship with every family if we know that that matters? So this model would say we have, first of all, the child in the center, and that child brings strengths and needs to the classroom. So that's going to set the tone for the relationship. Maybe if the child is presenting a lot of behavioral issues early on, right, that's going to set the tone for relationships. Or if the child is coming in and is that compliant child doing exactly what they're supposed to do and is at grade level, that's also going to set the tone for relationships. Then we have the microsystem. So the school and the home exist within the microsystem. Are settings similar? Are these two settings similar? Because if they are, there's a higher likelihood that there might be a greater understanding and those relationships are easier for that child to move in and out of these spaces. The next level, the mesosystem. Now this is looking at relationships within the microsystem. So the parent and our family members and their communication or relationship with the teacher. That's part of the mesosystem. So our goals, philosophies, and communication styles similar between those individuals? If so, probably we're going to see a stronger relationship. At the exosystem level, we acknowledge some of those indirect impacts, like a parent or family members and their work schedule. How available, how flexible are they to have a phone call, to show up at different activities, to, if the expectation is that they are working on something, homework, or with the child after school, are they available to do that? And that would then impact the relationship as well. At the macrosystem level, you can think about, okay, what is valued by schools when it comes to families? Well, typically the schools I'm in, they do value when families are showing up, when they can visually see family members or parents. And so if that is what's valued, that is going to also inform how we view families and how we relate and engage them. Now, in different cultures, it is a sign of respect to be hands-off with the school, to not be showing up, to not be asking questions, to, not be asking things of a teacher. That is a sign of respect. So again, right, depending on where you live, that is going to create just kind of a guide for what's expected at lower levels. And then we have the chronosystem. So thinking about change over time. Well, what families look like. That has changed a lot over time. Who is involved in the child's life? So most of our schools still cater to thinking about just the traditional family model of having a mother and a father and biological children. And what we know is that's just not what families are looking like anymore. We see so many more blended families. We see father-led households. We see grandparents raising grandchildren. And so that is also going to impact, if we haven't quite transformed our practices to match who our families are, that will also impact relationships. Urie Bronfenbrenner also talked about kind of these different levels of the spheres and how much impact they have. And so if you see closest to the child, he called these proximal processes. And that's the regular interactions between the child and their environment. And he said the more frequent the contact, the interactions, the bigger the impact. So if a child is living in an environment with, let's say, a sibling who has a lot of skills that they are sharing with their younger sibling, right, and they are constantly interacting, then Bronfenbrenner said, hey, that's going to have a big impact on the child. If the child lives in a household where maybe there are family members who aren't regularly as present, he would say that's also going to impact the child. So how regular those contacts are and what those interactions look like are going to make an impact. And if they happen regularly, they'll have a bigger impact. He then talked about these higher levels, kind of the more remote forces that create a blueprint for proximal processes. So one of the things I've been thinking about lately, because I do a lot of work on father engagement, is over time, fatherhood has changed a lot. What it means to be a male caregiver, what it means to be a father, and what is expected of you, how much involvement you might have in your child's life. That is something that has changed dramatically over the past few decades. So that is then creating a blueprint for lower levels, right? So therefore, at the microsystem level, what those daily interactions look like between a child and male caregiver are going to be different, because at the chronosystem level, that has changed. He also, Bronfenbrenner also talked a lot about thinking about transitions and thinking about change that goes on in children's lives and when we really need to offer support or when there's kind of the most flexibility in offering some change for a child. And so he talked about normative and non-normative transitions. Normative transitions are ones that we expect for a child. Transitioning into kindergarten, transitioning from middle school to high school. Those are things that we know are going to occur for almost all children. And he also said, hey, this is a great time to intervene or to change things up if you can or if you need to, because at that point with a normative transition, things are a little bit in flux, right? The context, the environment around a child is changing a little bit. So maybe this is the time to try something new. Maybe this is the time to reconnect with families and see if you can transform those relationships. He also talked about non-normative transitions that we don't necessarily expect for a child, maybe losing a family member, maybe moving, maybe experiencing a divorce, and that these are time points too that things are changing, things are shifting, and it is a time when if you do offer enough support, it can help put things in place that can benefit the child. And if not, it could lead to, he described the word as dysfunction in the child's life. So although this can offer a really holistic view of a child, there's also been some critique of Bronfenbrenner's work. First of all, many argue that he underemphasized individual characteristics. We have a lot of research that shows that genetics and child characteristics do make a big impact on their experiences as students. And so although he has kind of beefed up that portion, or he did beef up that portion of his theory over time, most people say it's still understated. But they also said that therefore he overemphasized the context and environment. And so most people would say we need maybe a little bit healthier balance between those two. Also, another critique is that he underemphasizes culture. So if you think about macro system is a little bit further out, it's a remote factor. And he said those proximal processes are much more impactful. But many would argue, especially for children from marginalized backgrounds or historically underrepresented backgrounds in the school setting, that culture, whether that be racial, ethnic, linguistic diversity, that is part of an everyday influence, and that it might need to be shifted down and closer to the child to understand even their daily proximal interactions. And a lot would argue that it can be just an overwhelming model. If you think about using this to guide your research or guide your work with students, where does it begin and where does it end? If you're having a child that isn't quite responding to the curriculum that you're using, right? Well, there's so many things that can explain why that's working or not. And so it's hard to know, what do you change? What do you shift? And so it can be overwhelming, but it gives us lots of ideas for how we can tackle different problems and how we can promote success. Thanks so much.